Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into a comparative analysis of two really pivotal moments in Ukraine's history. We're talking about the 2004 Orange Revolution and then the 2014 Euromaidan Uprising.
Yeah, these events are, really crucial, I think, for understanding, well, not only the path that, Ukraine's political development has taken, but also the complex geopolitical landscape of Eastern Europe. I mean, they really reveal a nation that's striving for both democracy and sovereignty, all while caught between these influences from Russia in the east and the European Union to the west.
For our analysis, we're primarily going to be relying on an academic paper that directly compares and contrasts the two uprisings. It looks at things like root causes, obviously the key players and events, and then the lasting consequences that it had for Ukraine, both domestically and on the international stage.
It's really important, I think, to kind of start by setting the stage here. So Ukraine, after they gained independence from the Soviet Union back in 1991, they began this challenging transition from a centrally planned economy to one that was market-based.
Right.
And this period was marked by, significant economic hardship for a lot of Ukrainians. There was a really steep decline in living standards, and they even saw hyperinflation.
So this economic turmoil, when you combine that with a lack of experience with institutions that were democratic and really just a rule of law, it created an environment where corruption could really thrive. And this is where we see powerful oligarchs start to emerge, wielding this undue influence over both the political and the economic landscape of the country.
Right. And that context of economic instability and then, widespread corruption, that really fueled public discontent and created this sense of disillusionment with the whole political system.
Right.
And then, of course, you have Ukraine's geographic location. I mean, right there between Russia and the European Union, and that led to this really deep internal division.
I mean, you're right. It's right in the middle. So it's going to...
It is. And, it's interesting because the eastern regions with those closer, historical and cultural ties to Russia, they often favored maintaining that strong relationship with Moscow.
Whereas Western regions, influenced more by European values and aspirations for economic integration, lean towards closer ties with the EU.
Exactly.
So this geopolitical tug of war, with this internal divide between pro-Russian and then pro-European sentiments, it played a huge role in shaping the events of both the Orange Revolution and the Euromaidan Uprising.
Absolutely. And so let's delve into that first pivotal event, the 2004 Orange Revolution. And the thing that really kicked it all off was the presidential election.
Right.
And in this election, you had Viktor Yanukovych, who was the pro-Russian prime minister, and he was going up against Viktor Yushchenko, who was a pro-Western reformer.
And initially, Yanukovych was declared the winner.
Yeah.
But very quickly, allegations of widespread electoral fraud, including voter intimidation, ballot stuffing, started surfacing.
Yeah, and these accusations, that the election was rigged, that really ignited public outrage, especially in the western and central regions of Ukraine, where support for Yushchenko was really strong.
We're talking hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians who took to the streets demanding a fair and transparent election. They adopted the color orange as a symbol of their movement, which of course became known as the Orange Revolution.
Yeah, the protests were primarily centered in Kyiv's independent square, known as the Maidan, and they were, for the most part, peaceful and, remarkably well organized. People from all walks of life were participating, united in their demand for democratic principles, and then also a rejection of what they perceived as Russian interference in their election.
And the scale and the determination of these protests put immense pressure on the government. And then you also had international observers who were condemning the irregularities in the election. So that further isolated the Yanukovych administration.
Yeah, I mean, they were facing mounting pressure. And so the Ukrainian Supreme Court actually took this unprecedented step of annulling the election results and ordering a new runoff vote.
I mean, that decision was really a testament to the power of peaceful protest and the effectiveness of civil society mobilizing to actually challenge authoritarian practices.
Right.
And then, of course, in the subsequent runoff election, which was held under pretty intense international scrutiny, Viktor Yushchenko emerged as the victor. And that really marked a significant moment for democracy in Ukraine.
Yeah, the Orange Revolution was, hailed as this victory for the Ukrainian people, and it really showed their commitment to democratic values. It signaled this desire to break from the corruption and the authoritarianism that, had plagued the post-Soviet era, and it really showed this yearning for those closer ties with Europe.
I mean, despite its initial success in ousting an authoritarian leader and bringing about that, democratic transfer of power, it ultimately failed to deliver on a lot of its promises.
Right, yeah, the euphoria of the Maidan, it kind of gave way to this period of political infighting and instability.
Yeah, the new government, led by Yushchenko and his ally Yulia Tymoshenko, was really plagued by these internal divisions and just struggled to implement any meaningful reforms.
Yeah, the Orange Coalition eventually fractured, and that promised crackdown on corruption just never materialized.
Yeah, a lot of Ukrainians, they felt disillusionment setting in. They'd hoped for this more profound transformation of their society.
Absolutely. And this failure to capitalize on the momentum of the Orange Revolution and to really deliver on those promises of, a cleaner and more democratic Ukraine, well, that set the stage for what would unfold nearly a decade later,
Right.
which culminated in the Euromaidan Uprising of 2014.
But before we get into that, I think it's worth taking a closer look at, the specific factors that contributed to the shortcomings of the Orange Revolution and the challenges that, continued to plague Ukraine in those years in between.
Yeah, I mean, one key factor was the deeply rooted corruption within those political and economic systems. While the Orange Revolution brought about that change in leadership, it did very little to actually dismantle these networks of patronage and influence that had really flourished under the previous regime.
The oligarchs who, had amassed this immense wealth and power during that chaotic transition to a market economy, they continued to exert really significant control over those key sectors of the economy.
Hmm.
And they were using, their resources to influence political decisions.
Right, and the new government, despite all their promises, proved either unable or unwilling to really challenge those entrenched interests.
Yeah, and that lack of progress on tackling corruption, I mean, that disillusioned a lot of Ukrainians, and it really eroded that trust in the political process.
Exactly.
And another thing that contributed to it was those internal divisions within the Orange Coalition itself. Yushchenko and Tymoshenko, even though they had that shared commitment to democratic principles and European integration, they had different visions for Ukraine's future. Their rivalry, I mean, that was fueled by personal ambition, of course, and disagreements about policy. That hampered the government's effectiveness, and it ultimately led to its collapse.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting that, the Orange Revolution, while successful in mobilizing civil society and galvanizing that public support for this democratic change, it didn't lead to, like, a fundamental restructuring of Ukraine's political institutions.
So the system, you're saying, remained vulnerable to manipulation by powerful interests.
Absolutely. And that rule of law remained weak.
So these shortcomings, when you combine them with the continued economic challenges and that persistent geopolitical tug of war between Russia and the West, it created this environment of simmering discontent.
It did.
And that set the stage for that next chapter in Ukraine's pretty tumultuous journey towards democracy and self-determination, the Euromaidan Uprising.
Right. So now let's shift our focus to 2013, where we see this, different set of circumstances leading to another one of those pivotal moments in Ukraine's history, the Euromaidan Uprising.
The thing that immediately triggered the Euromaidan protests was President Viktor Yanukovych's really unexpected decision in November 2013 to suspend those preparations for the signing of an association agreement with the European Union.
Right.
I mean, this agreement, it'd been years in the making, and a lot of Ukrainians saw it as this, crucial step towards closer integration with Europe and just this path to greater economic prosperity and democratic reforms.
Yeah, and Yanukovych's decision to back away from the agreement, I mean, he was under pressure from Russia, and it was widely seen as this betrayal by a large segment of the Ukrainian population, particularly in those western and central regions.
Right.
And this perceived betrayal triggered this wave of protests that were initially led by students and young activists.
And these protests, centered once again in Kyiv's Maidan Nezalezhnosti, they quickly gained momentum, drawing in people from all walks of life, really from across the country. So the Euromaidan, as the protest came to be known, it represented this culmination of years of frustration with corruption, economic stagnation, and, just a sense of being caught between these two competing geopolitical forces.
Yeah, and the demands of the Euromaidan protesters, I mean, they went beyond just the resumption of the EU association agreement. They were calling for an end to corruption, the resignation of President Yanukovych and his government, and just a deeper commitment to democratic values and human rights.
And the Euromaidan protests, they were different from those largely peaceful demonstrations of the Orange Revolution because they were met with this violent crackdown by the government. I mean, security forces used tear gas, water cannons, rubber bullets against the protesters, resulting in numerous injuries and deaths.
Right, and that brutality, I mean, it was captured on video and shared widely on social media, so that really further inflamed public anger and drew international condemnation.
Right.
And, that violence, rather than quelling the protests, it only made the Euromaidan participants more resolved. They remained camped out in the Maidan, braving those freezing temperatures and that threat of further attacks.
And then as the protests continued into the new year, the situation in Ukraine really escalated dramatically. In January 2014, the Ukrainian parliament, they were under pressure from the protests and facing international criticism. So they passed a series of laws that were aimed at, restricting freedom of assembly and expression.
Right.
It seemed like an attempt to curb the demonstrations.
It did.
And these laws, widely denounced as draconian and, anti-democratic, they only further galvanized those protesters.
Yeah, and then in February 2014, the violence reached this really tragic climax. Clashes between the protesters and those security forces intensified, and that resulted in the deaths of over 100 civilians who became known as the Heavenly Hundred.
Right.
And these deaths, many of them, attributed to sniper fire from government forces, well, that shocked the nation and the world.
It did.
And it marked a turning point, I think, in the Euromaidan uprising.
Absolutely. And faced with, that mounting pressure from the protests, international condemnation, and the defection of some of his key allies, President Yanukovych, he fled Ukraine in late February 2014, and that left this power vacuum in his wake. So his departure, that marked the end of his presidency, and it was a victory for those Euromaidan protesters who had succeeded in ousting that authoritarian leader.
Yeah, but that victory, it came at a really heavy price. The deaths of the Heavenly Hundred really underscored the high stakes of the struggle for, democracy in Ukraine and the lengths to which the Yanukovych regime was willing to go to hold on to power.
Right.
And the Euromaidan uprising, it had some really profound consequences for Ukraine, both internally and in terms of its relationship with Russia, who would view these events as this direct threat to their interests in the region.
Yeah, before we dive into those consequences, I think it's worth taking a moment to compare and contrast the two revolutions we've talked about so far, highlighting those common threads and key differences.
Okay, sounds good.
When you look at it, both the Orange Revolution and the Euromaidan Uprising, they were driven by a shared set of aspirations.
Right.
They both wanted a more, democratic and accountable government, a reduction in corruption, and those closer ties with Europe. Both movements saw widespread public participation, which I think really demonstrates this deep-seated yearning for change within Ukrainian society.
Yeah, and these movements also highlighted the power of, civil society to challenge authoritarianism and then mobilize public support for those democratic principles.
In both cases, you saw ordinary citizens, students, activists, people from all walks of life coming together to demand a better future for their country. And they were braving some pretty harsh weather conditions, those police crackdowns, and the threat of violence.
Yeah, but despite those shared characteristics, there were some pretty significant differences between the two revolutions, particularly in terms of their scale, their intensity, and then their outcomes.
Right, like the Orange Revolution, while a significant moment in Ukraine's post-Soviet history, it was ultimately a more limited event.
It was, yeah. It resulted in a change in leadership and then a rerun election, but it didn't lead to a fundamental restructuring of Ukraine's political system or a significant reduction in corruption. The Euromaidan Uprising, on the other hand, that was a much more profound and transformative event. It led not only to the ouster of President Yanukovych, but also to this wave of reforms that were aimed at, addressing some of the root causes of that discontent within Ukrainian society.
And another key difference, I think, is the level of violence. The Orange Revolution, for the most part, was peaceful.
Right.
With protesters and security forces generally exercising restraint. But the Euromaidan, it was marked by this pretty brutal crackdown by the government, resulting in the deaths of over 100 civilians.
Yeah, and that violence, especially those sniper attacks on protesters in February 2014, I mean, that really shocked the nation and the world, and it contributed to that rapid escalation of the crisis, ultimately leading to Yanukovych's downfall. And that bloodshed of the Euromaidan, it also highlighted those really deep divisions within Ukrainian society and the lengths to which the government was willing to go to, maintain its grip on power.
And the aftermath of the two revolutions also differed pretty significantly. The Orange Revolution, that led to this period of political instability and infighting with the new government, failing to capitalize on the momentum of those protests and deliver on those promises of reform. The Euromaidan, while also followed by a period of uncertainty and challenges, it resulted in a much more concerted effort to address corruption, strengthen democratic institutions, and move closer to Europe.
Right. The Euromaidan also had, profound geopolitical consequences, particularly in terms of Ukraine's relationship with Russia.
Right.
Moscow viewed the protests and then the subsequent ouster of Yanukovych as this Western-backed coup and just this direct threat to their interests in the region. So in response, Russia took a series of actions that would dramatically escalate tensions and, reshape that security landscape of Eastern Europe.
Yeah, just weeks after the fall of Yanukovych,
Yeah.
Russian troops, without insignia, took control of these strategic locations in the Crimean Peninsula,
Right.
which is a region of Ukraine with a majority Russian population. Then you had that hastily organized referendum, which was widely condemned as illegitimate by the international community, and those results were used to justify Russia's annexation of Crimea.
Right. Yeah. And that annexation, I mean, that was the first forcible seizure of territory in Europe since World War II. And it was met with, widespread condemnation and sanctions from the West. But it also marked this turning point in relations between Russia and the West.
Absolutely.
It signaled this new era of confrontation and mistrust.
And Russia's actions in Crimea, I mean, they weren't limited to annexation. Moscow also began providing, support to these separatist movements in eastern Ukraine.
Right.
Those regions with those large Russian-speaking populations, were discontent with the new government in Kyiv was simmering.
Exactly.
And that support, including weapons, funding, and military personnel, that fueled a conflict that would quickly escalate into a full-blown war.
It did, and the war in eastern Ukraine, which is still going on today, has resulted in the deaths of thousands of people and the displacement of millions more.
And it's had this, devastating impact on the Ukrainian economy, and has just become a major source of tension between Russia and the West.
Yeah, with both sides accusing the other of violating, ceasefires and fueling the conflict.
So these actions by Russia, following that Euromaidan uprising, they had this profound impact on Ukraine's national identity and its sense of self-determination.
They did.
The annexation of Crimea and that war in the East, it galvanized a sense of unity and patriotism among a lot of Ukrainians.
Right.
And they rallied behind their government and took up arms to defend their country.
Yeah, and these events also led to a hardening of attitudes towards Russia, with many Ukrainians viewing their eastern neighbor no longer as a brotherly nation, but as an aggressor and an existential threat.
Right.
And this shift in perception has had a significant impact on, Ukraine's domestic politics and its foreign policy orientation, leading to a greater emphasis on national security and a deepening of ties with the West.
And the Euromaidan uprising and then that subsequent Russian intervention, it also had this, transformative effect on Ukraine's relationship with Europe.
Yeah.
The association agreement with the EU, the initial trigger for the protests, that was eventually signed, which really symbolized Ukraine's commitment to those, closer integration with Europe.
Right. And Ukraine also embarked on this series of reforms aimed at strengthening democratic institutions, tackling corruption, and improving governance,
Right.
with the goal of meeting those EU membership criteria. And these reforms, while facing challenges and setbacks, they represent this significant shift from that post-Soviet era, which was characterized by corruption, oligarchic influence, and just a lack of accountability.
So the Euromaidan Uprising, despite those tragic consequences, it served as this catalyst for a really profound transformation of Ukrainian society and its relationship with with the world. It demonstrated the resilience of the Ukrainian people and their determination to chart their own course, free from that external influence and interference.
It did, but the legacy of the Euromaidan, it's complex and it's multifaceted. The conflict in eastern Ukraine is, it's still going on today.
It is.
Which is a constant reminder of, how fragile peace is and that, high cost of freedom.
Now let's shift our focus to the impact of these revolutions on Ukrainian national identity and then the country's orientation towards Europe. As we, kind of dig deeper into the long-term consequences of these revolutions, it's crucial to analyze the impact it had on Ukrainian national identity and the country's evolving relationship with Europe.
Yeah, both the Orange Revolution and the Euromaidan Uprising, they were, pivotal in shaping a modern Ukrainian national identity that was distinct from Russia.
Right.
I mean, they ignited this sense of unity and the shared commitment to building a democratic and European-oriented Ukraine. And that collective aspiration, it transcended those regional and linguistic differences, uniting Ukrainians from all walks of life.
And those events also significantly bolstered that public support for European integration. Many Ukrainians saw those closer ties with the EU as a way to achieve those democratic values, economic prosperity, and enhanced security.
Mm-hmm. Right. And the Euromaidan Uprising, I mean, that really underscored a unifying desire for national self-determination. I mean, we saw participation from all sorts of, ethnic and linguistic groups, all demonstrating that shared commitment to building a, democratic and European-oriented Ukraine.
Okay.
And that, that collective action, it signaled a profound shift in the country's, political consciousness.
So now let's turn our attention to those lasting consequences of these, revolutions, both domestically and in that geopolitical realm. Domestically, I think the most striking contrast lies in the realm of political reforms and governance. The Orange Revolution, despite its initial promise, it ultimately fell short of delivering lasting change.
Right. That post-Orange Revolution period was marked by, political infighting and just this lack of progress on key reforms. The entrenched power structures and vested interests, they really proved resistant to change. And that, that hindered the implementation of any meaningful reforms.
And then the Euromaidan, that spurred those more, concerted efforts to tackle corruption, strengthen democratic institutions, and improve governance.
Right.
I mean, there was this, noticeable shift in that, in the political landscape.
There was, and while those challenges definitely persist, that, post-Euromaidan period has seen a more determined, push for reform,
Right.
driven by those demands of the Ukrainian people and, and the aspiration to align with those European standards of governance.
Right. So shifting our focus to the geopolitical consequences, both revolutions contributed to this, significant realignment of Ukraine's foreign policy.
Right. Ukraine intensified its efforts to join both, NATO and the EU,
Yeah.
seeking that greater security and economic integration with the West. And this strategic reorientation, I mean, that stemmed from this, growing disillusionment with Russia and just a recognition of the benefits of having closer ties with Europe.
Right. So this shift in orientation has led to greater cooperation with, Western allies, particularly in the areas of defense and security. Ukraine has sought to modernize its military and enhance its defense capabilities with the support of those, Western partners.
Right, and that ongoing conflict in eastern Ukraine and then the annexation of Crimea, that has had a profound impact on Ukraine's security considerations.
It really has.
And, these events have really underscored the need for this robust, defense posture.
Right.
And they've led to a, greater reliance on Western support for military assistance and intelligence sharing.
And then Ukraine has also undertaken significant efforts to reduce its energy dependence on Russia.
Right, which involves diversifying those, energy sources, improving energy efficiency, and integrating with those European energy markets.
Right.
And those measures are, crucial for reducing Ukraine's vulnerability to Russian pressure and strengthening its economic independence.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into these pivotal events in Ukraine's history, I think it's important to reflect on the broader implications of these,
Yeah.
revolutions, not just for Ukraine, but for the global stage.
Right. I mean, Ukraine's experience offers these, profound insights into the dynamics of democracy, the complexities of nation building, and just that, ever-evolving geopolitical landscape of the 21st century and the Orange Revolution and the Euromaidan Uprising. They really stand as testaments to that, enduring human spirit, the pursuit of freedom, and the power of collective action. I mean, these events really underscore how fragile a democracy is, and that, constant vigilance that's required to safeguard those democratic values and institutions. They also highlight those, complexities of nation building in a region that's marked by those competing geopolitical interests.
And furthermore, Ukraine's experience, it demonstrates how interconnected domestic politics and international relations are.
Yeah.
I mean, the events in Ukraine have really reverberated across the global stage,
Yeah.
impacting relations between Russia and the West, reshaping security alliances, and raising those fundamental questions about that international order.
They have.
So we hope this analysis has provided you with a deeper understanding of these pivotal events in Ukraine's history and those enduring lessons that they offer. Ukraine's journey toward a more democratic and secure future continues, and the world is watching with bated breath as this story unfolds.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.